At the top of the food chain, there were always two predators. One of them was a strong and rather clumsy wolf, and the second was the brave and wise Leo, who always loved to protect his family. Then the question arose, what if a wolf and a lion got married and had a child? What animal could it be? And the answer was that this animal was a creature that had furry front paws, small, cute little ones, with front teeth like pebbles. It also had long, thin ears and was a cute little rabbit that everyone loved to cuddle. Of course, all this was pretty stupid. If the mother was a wolf and the father was a lion, then it was impossible to imagine that their child was born as some kind of fluffy and cute creature. However, this turned out to be the real truth. The girl who was born this rabbit could not believe what happened and did not know what the meaning of it was. For the girl, it didn't matter at all what powers she had or how cute and beautiful she was. This appearance definitely belonged to a rabbit, and no matter how she looked at herself, she still saw the same thing. Of course, this upset her very much. However, she did not even know what to do. She was born under the divine sermon, and yet she was just a little rabbit. She had nothing left but her grace. However, it would have been half the trouble if she had been just a rabbit. But the girl was a rabbit who one day was supposed to bring destruction to the whole earth. It all started just a few hours ago, when a small incident occurred at the heiress estate in the House of Wolves. The maid who was going upstairs saw the little girl who was going downstairs and asked the young lady where she was going. Was she really going to visit Madame? The girl with incredibly white hair, continuing to run down, said that all this was really so. She was an incredibly sweet child. And when the other maids saw her, they began to praise the girl and talk about how amazing she looked. Every time they saw her, they felt much better. One of the maids even said that she still couldn't believe that someone like this sweet child could soon wake up in the form of a wolf or a lion. The other maid agreed with her. However, she also said that she thought that the girl would be incredibly cool after she was able to awaken, and the maid agreed with her. This girl's name was Chloe, and she was the only daughter of the noble families of wolves and lions, the prophesied child who was to bear all the expectations. In fact, the place where she lived. It was a world inhabited by beast-like people. In the beginning, the continents were ruled by one God, who created everything that existed on that planet. God bestowed 4 powerful families of beast-like creatures and unique supernatural abilities to each of them, and also appointed one person in charge of each of the 4 regions. One of them was the Eagle of the East, who could see the future. His name was Gravis. Then there was the Snake of the West, who lived forever. Her name was Demos. Also present was the Lion from the South, who possessed Mana. His name was Leander. And finally the Wolf from the North, who possessed the power of regeneration and combat. His name was Eris. These 4 families used their gifts to peacefully rule the continent in order to live in peace and happiness. However, as time passed, their supernatural powers began to fade little by little, and just as cracks began to form between countless families, the prophecy came true for them. This prophecy stated that a child born from a family of a lion and a wolf was to finally bring peace to the entire continent. Desperate to regain their powers and themselves, they entered into a political marriage between lions and wolves, and the following year, the very same baby was finally born, as the heavens had predicted. And this charming creature turned out to be Chloe, of course. But the happiness from her birth did not last long. Soon after the girl grew up, her mother and father divorced, of course. When she asked her mother about it, no one answered her. They always avoided the topic that could concern her father. After some time, Chloe finally ran up to the right room and with difficulty opened the door, since she was still a very little girl, and went inside. There she saw her mother standing near the window. This woman was simply beautiful, and the girl immediately squeezed inside to approach her and talk. Her mother was Princess Melissa Eris. She was from the Wolf clan. And as soon as Chloe went inside, she saw that for some reason she was upset. However, Chloe was no stranger to this. It wasn't the first time she saw her mother looking downcast, and the girls felt sad about it too. In fact, every spring during the period when she divorced her father, Mom always seemed a little gloomy during that couple of years. However, Chloe always wondered what must have happened between them that it affected Melissa so much. The girl eventually decided not to disturb her mother, and, closing the door, decided that she would come to her a little later. Be that as it may, She was still hoping that her mother would get better very soon, and Chloe went outside thinking about how she could help lift her spirits. When the girl saw that there were many beautiful flowers growing in the garden, she thought that this could help her. For this reason, Chloe hummed a tune so that she would not be sad and picked some flowers, because Melissa loved them, and the girl thought that she would be able to rejoice as soon as she saw this beautiful bouquet. When Chloe collected a small bouquet, she wondered if she should make a crown out of them. She thought that a crown of white lilies would look absolutely stunning on her mother. But just as she was about to do this, she suddenly heard some strange rustling nearby. Looking more closely, she saw that something was moving in the bushes nearby. Some kind of white creature was visible from there. Soon it came out and ran up to the girl, and Chloe saw that it was a small, adorable rabbit that was incredibly cute. She immediately laughed and said that he was simply amazing, then asked where he came from. Chloe assumed that he had also come to look at the flowers, and also said that he was just in time. After all, she had collected several in her hands, which might please him. However, at that moment, the video suddenly stopped, and the girl didn't even blink an eye, and immediately became wary, not understanding why his reaction changed so abruptly. However, the moment she was about to pet him, he simply took and galloped away from her, frightened by what was behind the girl. Chloe. I was very upset, not understanding where and for what reason he ran away. Then she assumed that she most likely scared him, because she was a predator. But she didn't want to do that at all. She wanted to be friends with him. However, the girl turned her head to the side, hearing some strange sound again. And then she saw that a large bird was flying in the sky. Looking more closely, the girl realized that it was a hawk. And as soon as she saw that it began to approach her directly, she became incredibly scared. Chloe started to cry. She thought he was flying straight at her and didn't know what to do for a while. She was really confused and just sat there. But then she realized that she had to run away immediately. The girl stood up and ran away from there very quickly, even losing some of the flowers that she had in her hands. Some time passed from that moment, and now she ran into her bedroom and crawled onto the bed and hid under the blanket in the hope that this could hide her from danger. At one point, she even thought that she really could die. She was incredibly scared of this hawk, and because of this, she knew that if she had been even a little slower, the hawk would have caught her for sure. But she didn't understand one thing: why he had attacked her. Then Chloe suddenly calmed down and thought about why she started running, because she was a predator and had to behave very bravely. However, when she got out of bed, she suddenly felt some changes in herself. The girl did not understand why her body became so light. She decided to go to the mirror and look at herself. And when Chloe did this, she saw in the reflection not the little girl she always was, but a little green-eyed rabbit. She was simply horrified and did not understand how she could have transformed into a rabbit, and most importantly, why. For a while, she still hoped that this was not her final transformation. However, she soon realized that this was exactly it. The girl was so upset that she fell on the floor and covered her eyes with her ears. Her parents were a wolf and a lion, so it was outrageous for her that she was transformed into a rabbit. Chloe began to hit herself on the head with her soft and furry paws, in the hope that she could wake up again and be a wolf at least. However, after some time, nothing happened, and she only earned herself an extra headache due to the fact that she hit herself hard on the top of her head. In fact, the shock of being transformed into a rabbit lasted only a short time before the distant nightmares from her memory came back to her. Some memories from her past life suddenly appeared before her eyes, as she was a dark-haired girl who was attacked and even beaten by her beloved man. Chloe was amazed that she could even see this and didn't know how it could happen. But eventually, with the sudden return of her memories from her past life, she realized that this world was the setting for a novel she had once read. And she also remembered that the title of this novel was a warning. The story began with a snapper Leandra from the lion family, and also with the murder of his wife Melissa Eris from the wolf family, along with his daughter Chloe. However, after that, the guy simply could not stand the emotions that fell on him and killed himself in the same way. Of course, these events sparked a war between the two families that were the most influential in that empire. The conflict eventually escalated into a full-scale war that nearly destroyed the entire continent until two protagonists appeared, and used their unique abilities to save the entire world. Thus, they were able to put an end to the war, and peace came to the whole world. In fact, when Chloe first read this novel, she wondered why Lucian killed his daughter and wife. It was really incomprehensible to her. However, now she could finally understand it. The reason why her father suddenly did something like this was because his child, who was born from two powerful beasts, ended up being a cute rabbit. And now that Chloe found herself in such a situation, she understood what was really happening. She realized the fact that her father suspected her mother of cheating and felt completely betrayed, and that was the reason he did what he did. Remembering the plot of the novel, she understood that if all this continued like this, then war would definitely start. And she certainly didn't want that. Suddenly, someone knocked on Chloe's door. However, as soon as she heard the voice, she immediately realized that it was her mother and was very scared because she came at a very inopportune time. But then she remembered. Why did her mother come to her? After all, they were supposed to try on her dress for her birthday that very day. The girl was in a panic. She didn't know what to do. She needed to somehow quickly tear off and transform back. However, she didn't know yet how this could be done. After some time, Melissa opened the door to the room and turning to her daughter said that she was coming in. But as soon as the woman saw Chloe, she was very surprised and asked what happened to the girl's hair. And also whether everything was okay with her, because she had done a beautiful hairstyle for her in the morning. Miraculously, Chloe managed to transform. However, her hair was in an ugly state. She immediately smiled and told her mother that everything was fine and that she should not worry. She really concentrated incredibly hard on transforming into a human and tensed her entire body, and somehow it eventually worked. At that moment, the door opened again, and Blake walked into the room. Eris was the head of the Wolf clan, and also Chloe's uncle. The man, opening the door, immediately approached her and greeted her, lifting her up because he was very glad to see her. Black asked if it was true that it was the day to choose a dress for their little birthday girl, sighing heavily. He said that he would miss her very much because of that. However, he was glad that he was invited. In fact, her mother and uncle really adored Chloe, and they loved her with all their hearts, so they wanted to make sure that the girl was always happy. However, Chloe was already beginning to doubt that this could continue for long. She didn't know if she could truly continue to hide the fact that she had been transformed into a rabbit, and that it could not be changed now. The fact that she transformed turned out to be pure luck. She didn't even understand and didn't know how it was possible to do this at all. But Chloe wasn't worried about her mother and uncle, because even if she told them who she really was, they would still accept her and love her. She knew that very well. At that moment, Blake suddenly picked up the girl in his arms, turned to her, and asked why she suddenly started crying. He was even afraid that he had accidentally hurt her when he threw her up. But Chloe decided that she had to tell them the truth, because these two deserved to know she had to confess to them and eventually figure out how to stop the war soon. When the girl was about to say that she had succeeded, the uncle suddenly turned to Melis and said that their little Chloe was too hungry to even speak, so they had to feed her. The woman immediately agreed with him and said that it was indeed so. After that, she told Chloe to go with them. She wanted to cook her something to eat and thus cheer her up. Blake, meanwhile, finally put her down on the ground and said that the lunch that day was very special and asked the girl if she knew the menu for that day. Chloe, of course, didn't know that. So she asked what was for lunch, feeling a little sorry that she had missed her chance to tell them the truth. But at that moment, her uncle and mother said in one voice that they had rabbit for dinner. And hearing this, Chloe was shocked. Although she should have expected it, because this was a place where predators ruled, and it was completely natural that they would not eat grass. She herself was part of the Wolf clan, so she should never have forgotten what exactly they ate. Chloe decided not to worry about the rabbit she was supposed to eat for lunch, since it wasn't the most important problem at all. To begin with, she had to at least simply survive, without letting anyone know her secret that she was now a rabbit. And so, several hours passed since then. They had already had lunch and returned to Chloe's room in order to finally choose the perfect dress for her. The girl stood behind the screen, and the maid helped her get dressed. Meanwhile, Melissa turned to her brother and asked if he thought that the girl was still a little upset. Blake himself became very serious and said that he also noticed this, and it made him wary because usually Chloe was always so cheerful. Her mother, sighing heavily, said that the thought of the past still made her panic. And besides, remembering the hysteria the girl had thrown a few hours ago before dinner made her even more wary. Melissa told her brother that she never expected that she could throw such a tantrum over rabbit meat. And Blake even suggested that his niece had started some kind of puberty or something like that. After all, she had never behaved like this before. But at that moment, their conversation was interrupted by the maid, who said that Melissa was already ready, so they had to look at her new dress. The man and woman immediately turned happily and looked at Chloe, who came out to them in a beautiful pink dress. As soon as the woman saw her daughter, she couldn't even hold back her tears. It was an amazing sight. She looked incredibly cute in this new outfit. Uncle was also delighted. He said that she was a real angel who descended on their clan, and Melissa even spun around to show off her outfit from all sides. They started showering her with various compliments, and even the maid said that the dress looked perfect and emphasized her beautiful emerald eyes. And her shiny hair and apple cheeks just wanted to be squeezed and combed. They said that in that world there was no one sweeter than their Chloe, and they were very happy that such an angel was with them. The girl even felt a little embarrassed at that moment. She decided that they had already overacted, and because of this, she felt very awkward. Then suddenly, Blake came up to her and, addressing her as a precious little angel, asked if he could hug her, because he wanted to do it so much. Chloe, nervous, laughed and allowed him to do it, but decided that this could not continue forever, so she decided to stop all this tenderness. Chloe immediately screamed loudly and said that in any case, the dress was really beautiful and asked if she really had to wear it to her birthday party. The man, getting to his feet, said that he could not even imagine that she could really like it so much. And Melissa continued to smile and said that since she liked this dress, they could finally show everything else, what they had prepared. Chloe, hearing this, was very wary and immediately asked her mother what she meant. But at that moment, the woman asked the maids to come in and bring what was needed. Then the maids started bringing in a bunch of different gorgeous and very expensive dresses. And Melissa explained that they had collected all of their cutest dresses on the premises so that Chloe would have something to choose from. So the woman, smiling happily, asked what the girl thought about trying them all on and ultimately making a final choice on the ideal one. As soon as Chloe saw all this volume of the dress, she was simply horrified. She was really very surprised because she did not expect this and was scared because she did not want to spend so much time choosing a dress. And so, when many hours had passed since that moment, Chloe finally tried on all these dresses and did not even notice how she was able to move to her bedroom and fall asleep. She woke up because she heard some loud conversations coming from the half-open door. One of the voices said very cautiously that she didn't understand something about this guy's right to date their precious Chloe. The girl at that moment had already completely woken up and found out that this voice belonged to her uncle. He looked very angry, so she decided to go out and see what was happening there. When Chloe looked out into the hallway, she heard Blake say that one man disappeared without saying a single word goodbye. But now he wanted to play the role of a real good father. Hearing this, the girl was very surprised. She could not believe that this really meant that her father wanted to see her. Blake was incredibly angry at that moment. He said that Melissa herself knew that he still couldn't forget that terrible day, and it made him angry every time. Mother, who was standing next to him, also heard him say that when she returned pregnant and said she wanted a divorce, she tried to smile through her swollen eyes, along with tears. And all this happened because of this terrible prophecy. He even hated himself for allowing her to marry this guy at all, and still blamed himself a little. Melissa, sighing heavily, told her older brother that if she refused this, then this whole situation could lead them to war, and she certainly did not want that. She also added that their family's protective mana stones were almost gone, and if they had entered into a clash with the Lion Clan, they would have been in a much worse situation than they were now. However, the man was very strict. He said that he didn't care at all, even if a war started. He believed that perhaps the time had finally come to take revenge on these cats who thought that they could do anything. Blake also said that lifting restrictions on the stone trade, which has stifled them for years, would be very welcome for them. The man also immediately said that he would never allow his precious niece to have any contact with anyone like that out of fear. As soon as Chloe heard her uncle's words, she thought about what would happen if a war started because of her. She definitely couldn't allow that. Melissa was silent for a while, and then she asked her brother, what if he really asked for a meeting as a father who wanted to see his daughter? Could she really believe that he was sorry that he had lost so many years and just wanted to meet her? Of course, Blake heard this and became even more angry. He loudly shouted at his sister, asking if she even knew what the Lion Clan was doing, and not throwing the weak off a cliff using children as test subjects. And they did this not only with other clans, but also with their own children. The man asked his sister if she really thought that such monsters wanted to deprive Chloe of her father's love. As soon as the girl heard these words, she was shocked. She could not believe that they were actually experimenting on children. Then she thought about the book and realized that this whole world was built on how it was said in the novel, and when she started thinking about its plot, she suddenly understood. 4 gifted clans that inherited supernatural abilities each took control of a part of the continent, and the other races naturally simply adapted to them. For hundreds of years, they lived isolated in their own territories because they could not command, because they were not gifted with such power. And Chloe knew that it was most likely because of her isolation that the little misunderstandings that started as prejudices eventually turned into ingrained truths. And even the first meeting of the main characters, a man and a woman, was ruined because of just such a stupid misunderstanding. Therefore, Chloe assumed that perhaps all the stories about the Leo clan were just rumors and misunderstandings. The girl really hoped that this was the case, because she would not want it to be true. She also really didn't want to be thrown off a cliff or turned into some kind of twisted lab experiment, and especially not by her own father. Meanwhile, Melissa suddenly stood up from her seat and said that her brother was indeed right and that she had been too naive. Therefore, she shouldn't have even thought about such a thing. She decided that for her daughter's sake, she had to become at least a little tougher in order to protect her. She believed that Chloe really needed it. At that moment, the girl suddenly noticed that her mother began to approach the room and realized that she needed to return to bed as quickly as possible so that she would not suspect anything. Pine ran in very quickly and jumped onto the bed and immediately pretended as if she had been sleeping all this time. At that moment, the door to her bedroom opened. The mother came in and was a little surprised because the door was slightly open, but she immediately went to her daughter, who was sleeping peacefully. The woman stroked her head and thought that her sweet little Chloe was sleeping so soundly that she didn't even hear their conversations and didn't wake up. Melissa is glad that she smiled and whispered to her daughter that she shouldn't have worried about anything at all. No matter what happened, her mother would have protected her from everything. She really wanted the girl to simply grow up happy and carefree. For her, this would be the greatest happiness. Melissa sat next to her daughter for a while longer. Then she left, leaving her to sleep peacefully and calmly. As soon as Chloe heard these words, she immediately burst into tears for some time. She lay and thought about her mother, who took such good care of her. Then she sat up on the bed and thought that the Lion Clan really wasn't her most important goal at that moment. If she returned to the plot and the original stories, she would remember that the main male destroyed the Wolf Clan, blaming them for the war. And this meant that all those people who were incredibly important to her and her beloved, including her mother and uncle, all of them had to die because of this. Of course, as soon as Chloe imagined them dead, she cried even harder because she was worried. She did not remember everything perfectly, but she knew that her past life was filled with violence and cruelty. However, the family she found in this new world was completely different, and she loved it with all her heart. They actually panicked the moment Chloe felt even the slightest discomfort. They were the first real family she had ever had, so she understood that she couldn't just sit and do nothing. The girls needed to be protected somehow, because she couldn't allow the people she loved to just die. And that meant that Chloe had to stop the Great War before it started. The girl went to her desk and took out paper and her pencils. She decided that she needed to start with, figure out the timeline. The first major event was that the Lion Clan was invaded. It was at that moment that her mother really had to get seriously hurt. Chloe immediately lay on the floor and began to write it all down on paper, as well as make small sketches. But then she suddenly noticed the mirror that was opposite her and saw that she suddenly had rabbit ears on the top of her head. She was incredibly surprised by this, and she did not understand why her ears suddenly appeared. She immediately tried to remove them and remembered that the most important and fundamental factor for her was to hide the fact that she was a reborn rabbit. Then she put the pencils aside and went closer to the mirror and realized that she needed to focus all her energy on this thought, and maybe they would disappear. However, at that moment, Chloe could not even suspect that the invasion of the Lion Clan turned out to be completely close to the truth. Some time passed from that moment, and finally the day came that the Wolf family had been waiting for so long. Of course, it was Chloe's birthday, and as soon as she entered the hall where her servant's mother and uncle were waiting for her, they all immediately started shouting in unison, "I congratulate her on this holiday." Everyone was really very happy. They started congratulating her, hugging and kissing her, and Chloe, smiling happily, thanked them for it and said that she was pleased. In fact, her 7th birthday party and banquet had finally started, and quite a lot of people had gathered, and a big celebration had been organized. However, when the Pine Needles saw all this attention, which was devoted only to her, she was very surprised, because she did not suspect that they all loved her so much that they even gave her many gifts. People's eyes were literally filled with how happy they were to see Chloe, and how much they wanted to talk to her and hug her. Of course, the girl was incredibly happy and grateful to everyone for loving her so much. However, she thought that it was too much. They didn't even give her a minute to be alone. Even compared to the king and princess, her uncle and mother, her birthday banquet seemed more extravagant and big to the girl. She didn't even know if it was right. Some time passed from that moment, and then suddenly, Chloe heard a male voice behind her, which she immediately recognized. As soon as she turned her head to the side, she saw a young guy named Brooks. He approached the girl and, smiling happily, congratulated her on her birthday. The man was in his usual uniform, and Chloe was a little upset about it. She said that she expected him to dress cool that day, but the man immediately said that he beat her night escort, so he had to do his duty. Even though this holiday was official, so he definitely could not wear anything else. But Chloe didn't understand what could have happened on such a day, so she didn't know. Why did he continue to perform his duties? However, they closed the topic pretty quickly. Brooks said that he approached her to give her a gift that he had specially prepared for the princess. He handed her a small toy and said that it was a handmade doll. As soon as Chloe saw this, she was even a little surprised, because this doll did not look the most neat. However, she assumed that he was trying to portray her. She knew that this was what he wanted to do for his daughter one last time, and ultimately decided to do it for her. But Chloe pretended that she didn't understand at all what it was, and asked Brooks why he did it. The man was very indignant, and said that, in fact, it was a gift for his daughter. As soon as the girl heard this, she was a little surprised, and did not even know how to react to it. Of course, the design of this doll was very unusual. However, Chloe still appreciated the efforts he made thinking about her, so she immediately took this doll and said that it was very nice. She also added that she was sure to go to bed holding it in her hands every night. She sincerely thanked her knight for such a wonderful gift. Brooks laughed and immediately said that he was really happy that she liked her. However, at that moment, her uncle suddenly came up to the girl and picked her up. He told Chloe that it was time for her to close her eyes and make a wish, and also to blow out the candles on her cake. As soon as Chloe heard about the wish, she immediately asked why she had to do it, and Blake explained that if she wanted something, she had to tell the dragon about it, and he would definitely fulfill her wish. Then the girl immediately closed her eyes and began to mentally address the dragon. She asked him to help her prevent the war at absolutely any cost. In response, even Chloe promised that she had to do her best and try as hard as she could to do everything in her power. She really wanted the dragon to make sure that her family and all the citizens of the kingdom would remain unharmed. After this, Chloe immediately blew out her candles on the cake, and the people applauded. Everyone continued to congratulate her on her birthday, and the girl thought that the most important thing was that now everyone was together and could celebrate her day. For her, it was really nice. And at that moment, Chloe felt happy and realized that she had a premonition that everything was definitely going to be good. But at that moment, the doors to the hall suddenly opened, and one of the knights turned to His Highness, saying that they had urgent news. Blake immediately turned to him and asked what had happened so urgently. Why had he interrupted their celebration? The men were silent for a while, unsure if he should say this. However, he then shouted, saying that the Lion Clan had attacked their estates. He also said that he thought they used warp to infiltrate the royal palace. They wanted to defeat all the wolves and find Princess Chloe. As soon as people around heard this, they immediately panicked. But most of all, Melissa asked her friend to take care of her daughter. The woman thought that the lion forces were chasing her, so it was her fault, and she had to protect them all. The knight immediately took the girl in his arms and said that he would do whatever was necessary. But most importantly, Chloe realized that the original story had changed a lot. In the original, the attack was supposed to happen after she would have turned 10. But now it happened completely differently. And besides, the girl suddenly remembered that, at this very time of the revolution, her mother was supposed to be killed. And as soon as Chloe thought about this, she felt simply terrible in her soul. The girl knew she couldn't let that happen. So as Brooks carried her through the halls, she immediately asked, "What about her dear mother?" The man replied that she shouldn't worry, because she was one of the best in the Wolf Clan and would definitely be able to take care of herself and protect herself if necessary. Chloe looked very scared. She immediately started protesting and asked him to take her to her mother immediately, but in fact, she had a bad feeling, so she had to see for herself. But Brooks responded that it was incredibly dangerous to be there, so she had to evacuate to the safe place so that Chloe would not get hurt. However, while they were running, further and further, the girl suddenly heard the voice of your mother, who began to tell others that they would definitely not take her daughter. At that moment, her ears suddenly grew, and as soon as Brooks saw this, he was shocked. However, Chloe was able to escape from him. She hid behind his back, and he wondered if the princess had just grown bunny ears. He really couldn't believe what he saw with his own eyes. The girl, meanwhile, ran through the corridors as she found the perfect opportunity to do what she wanted. Of course, Chloe was quite worried about the fact that the invasion had been moved to an early date. However, she knew that if everything had gone as in the original story, her mother would have been seriously injured in this battle. And because of this, her uncle had to even start a war. So the girl had to prevent all this as soon as possible and find another way out of this situation. When she opened the door, she immediately turned to her mother, Chloe Da, and went to find her and leave this place far away. The girl screamed in search of her mother, and the woman who was fighting against two knights heard her. Of course, she was amazed that she heard Chloe. The girl immediately turned around to see her daughter and ask what she was doing there. And just at that moment, two knights with whom she was fighting took a swing at her. However, they quickly lost interest in the lady because they saw what they came for. The men rushed towards Chloe, and one of them even reached for the girl as he shouted that they had finally found her. As soon as Melissa heard this, she became even more angry and immediately turned to her daughter and asked her to close her eyes, because what she was about to see could definitely shock a small child. And at the same moment, she killed these two with just one blow, thereby even splashing the girl with blood a little. However, she closed her eyes and did not see it. After some time, the woman ran up to her. She immediately turned to Chloe in an alarmed voice and asked if everything was okay with her. The girl, meanwhile, burst into tears. Then Brooks ran into the room. He shouted, "I addressed the princess asking where she really is." After she ran away from him, he kept trying to find her. But then suddenly, the man heard the voice of the lady who called him. She immediately began to shout at him, asking, how could he even bring Chloe in such a dangerous situation? And most importantly, why did he obey her order to take the girl away? The man immediately asked for forgiveness. He replied that he was ready to accept any punishment and did not even explain the situation that had occurred. Melissa, meanwhile, was already holding the girl in her arms. She told him to forget about it, because at that moment, the priority was to hide Chloe in a safe place, and she really wanted him to do it. However, Melissa also said that this time, she would like to go with them in order to control everything. And so, after some time had passed since then, they finally reached a safe room. The woman put the girl on the ground and told her to stay there now, and that her mother would return very soon. But Chloe, of course, immediately started screaming and said that she wanted to stay with her. She asked her mother not to leave. Chloe cried in the closet and said that everyone else was fighting and wondered if the one person who was so dear to her couldn't escape this and just be with her. Because of this, Milas became incredibly hard. However, she said that the truth is that she was much stronger than all the other gray wolves. Also smiling, Melissa said that the girl Vitya herself had seen earlier how she defeated two enemies with one blow, and since she was still the princess of the kingdom, in order to protect her and the citizens, she had to go. Before doing this, the woman hugged her precious daughter and also asked if Chloe could trust her and wait for some time until everything would get better. The girl continued to cry in the meantime. However, she agreed with her mother and said that she would wait until she returned. Melissa closed the closet in which she hid her daughter and also said that she loved her incredibly much. In fact, Chloe then began to blame herself very much when she saw the door closing and watched her mother move further and further away. In the end, she couldn't change anything anyway, and Chloe didn't understand what good it was to remember her past life and know the original story if in the end she was just a little kid who couldn't do anything. And then suddenly, while the girl was sitting in the closet and crying loudly, she heard some sound that was similar to the door opening, and then she also heard steps. The girl realized that someone had entered the room. Chloe was very wary. She heard voices talking to each other, and then they addressed her directly, and stretching out each word, they asked, did she really think that no one could find her there? At that moment, she remembered even more vividly the memories from her past life, when during a quarrel with her parents, she hid in the closet in order not to see or hear any of this. However, her father then wished to find her. Chloe continued to cry, her whole body shaking with fear, and she really hoped that someone would find and save her, since she couldn't do anything. At that moment, the door to the closet suddenly opened, and the girl immediately thought that it was her evil father who was coming, who was from that life and also wanted to attack her, like her mother. However, this was not the case. A blonde guy stood in front of Chloe, and the girl meanwhile continued to sit on her knees. She folded her hands together and prayed. Through tears, she asked for forgiveness and told them not to beat her. She was ready to do everything they told her, but she just wanted them not to do anything bad to her. As soon as the man saw her, he just stood there completely shocked and said nothing. He looked at the girl for a while, and Chloe was very surprised when nothing happened. She finally plucked up the courage to open her eyes because she didn't hear a single sound, and as soon as she looked at this guy who was shocked, Chloe was very surprised because this blonde guy was completely unfamiliar to her. However, for some reason, he was looking at her with his big green eyes and crying. She didn't understand why he was looking at her like that, and he was crying, and who he was anyway. However, at that moment, the guy knelt down and turned to her, asking if it was true that she was a Chloe. After that, through his tears, he suddenly smiled and said that although it was not the first time they met in their lives, he could definitely tell that it was her. The girl was amazed by the behavior of this man. However, she suddenly realized that his eyes were exactly the same color as hers, and she assumed that this was all because he was her father. Chloe's theory was confirmed when the man extended his hand, continued to smile, and said that he was incredibly happy to meet his dear daughter. In fact, when she was still very little, she often asked her mother about her father and asked what kind of person he was. Melissa answered honestly. She said that he was a stupid and inflexible person, but to her, he was incredibly kind and warm. Every time the woman remembered her husband, she cried, and as soon as Chloe saw this, she was shocked. She even thought about what she said or did. The wrong thing. But Melissa immediately smiled and said that, in fact, her father was such a person that she sometimes even hated him with all her soul. However, this did not cancel all those factors when he treated her well. But in fact, after Chloe saw that her mother was so deeply affected by this topic and that she burst into tears, the girl decided to never bring it up again. However, now that quite a lot of time has passed since that moment, Chloe finally saw her father, and when everything calmed down around her, that moment when she asked her mother about her father in a dream came to her as a memory. Waking up, the girl felt tears running down her cheeks and wondered why this memory came to her at that particular moment. But as soon as Chloe woke up, she immediately heard some conversations nearby. She looked around and realized that she had never seen this interior before. After that, she turned her head and saw two fair-haired guys who were sitting not far from her and talking about something. When she looked more closely at the older man, who said that if he hadn't just tried a little harder, she thought Melissa might change her mind. Chloe knew immediately that this was absolutely the man she saw crying when he looked at her. Then she realized that she didn't remember anything that happened next, and all because she lost consciousness sometime after he called her his daughter. In fact, the man grabbed Chloe and hid her under his jacket and began to run away with her. Of course, Melissa, who was in battle at that moment, noticed this. However, she could not influence it in any way. She only saw the back of her former lover, and with tears in her eyes, she screamed the name of the daughter who was stolen from her. Chloe rolled over as she remembered all of this, and realized that she had indeed been kidnapped by the Lion Clan, and of course, this upset her. She even felt a bit uneasy about this. She didn't know what she should do now. She was even afraid that they could do something nasty to her. But then Chloe heard one of the male voices turn to the other and say that even if her brother didn't want to believe it, the fact was still a fact. They were abusing a child. He asked if the other knew that they had talked about throwing the child into a dark room, giving her spoiled food, and even releasing wild animals just to enjoy the horror that showed on the poor girl's face. He also said that they used this poor child in various evil experiments, and that's why she looked so silent and scared, that's why. So he just saved poor Chloe. As soon as the girl heard this, she was shocked. She could not believe that there really were such places where they could abuse children so much. She could not even imagine it. It was terrible. Chloe didn't even realize that they meant her house. But then the man suddenly shouted that they said right before the rescue that the child was locked in a closet. Of course, they considered it atrocity. Also, when he found this little girl, she clung to this poor, battered doll with all her might, as if she could save her. Although it looked like it was trash, Chloe then finally understood who they were talking about and was shocked, and all because they also said that the Wolf Clan had definitely violated the lawful behavior towards this girl. All these things that they said, Chloe understood that they were talking about her house and herself. They were talking about how she was being abused, and it really hit her. Then the man, suddenly sighing heavily, asked if he really thought that they continued to lie, since he knew that they could never tell a lie. The man who was Chloe's father sighed heavily and said that perhaps it was true. However, the girl who heard them replace the real name with a pronoun was immediately surprised and did not understand who they were talking about. However, the second guy who sat opposite the father said that according to them, Melissa hated and condemned her daughter more than anyone else. For this reason, they simply had to do it. Of course, as soon as the girl heard these accusations, she could not believe that they said such words about her mother, so she was not going to tolerate all this anymore. Chloe sat up in bed and screamed. Turning to them, she said that her mother was the sweetest and most caring person on that planet, so she really wished that they would not say such things again. After she said these words, there was silence between them in the room for a while. The man slowly turned towards the bed and looked at her for a while without taking his eyes off her. Chloe felt very awkward about this. She immediately turned away and covered her face with a blanket, not understanding what she was supposed to do at all. She suddenly started screaming in the middle of someone else's conversation. Because of this, the girl was very worried. When she heard the man stand up and start to come closer to her, she decided that the best option was to simply pretend that she had fallen asleep, which is exactly what Chloe did. At the same time, with her eyes closed, she began to whisper something else so that it would seem as if she had said this phrase in a dream. As the man came closer, he was worried and didn't know what to do. Maybe they should go away and leave her alone. However, Chloe understood that if everything continued at this pace, she could be easily exposed, so she pretended that she had just woken up in front of their eyes. Stretching, she turned to the men and wished them good morning. However, as soon as she looked at their evil faces, she laughed nervously and began to think about what she had done wrong. However, the man who was her father immediately asked if she had slept well and how she felt in general now. Then suddenly, the girl thought about the fact that she had already heard a similar rough voice before, and immediately remembered that moment before she lost consciousness, when this man, holding out his hand, said that he was very glad to meet her and called her his daughter. She realized that she had seen this face in her mother's wedding portrait, which the woman had hidden from sight some time later. Then Chloe realized that this man was her father, Snapper. However, then she looked at the guy who also had blonde hair. I was healing next to my father, and she immediately became interested in who he was in that case. Lucian meanwhile turned to the man who was standing nearby and immediately asked anxiously what they were supposed to do. However, Chloe realized that this man was the one who brutally killed her uncle in the original novel. He was the head of the Lion Clan, the king of the Great Lands. His name was Ian, and he was the head of the Lion family. The man thought for a moment and remained silent before answering Lucian. The girl immediately clenched her fists. She realized that this place, where even a small misunderstanding could spark a war, was very dangerous for her, so she really didn't know what to do. She decided that before the conflict between the two families escalated further, she needed to clarify the misunderstandings they had about her being abused. So after a short silence, Chloe turned to them and said that she had accidentally overheard their conversation and also decided that there had been a misunderstanding that she needed to clarify. With a trembling voice, because all this made her angry, she said that her mother and uncle loved her incredibly much, and she loved them too. She also said that they had never offended her and had never even thought of doing so she was incredibly surprised by the words they said. Then suddenly, the Snapper came closer to her and took her hand, and in a sad voice, he said that if she continued to clench her little fists like that, her hands would hurt incredibly badly tomorrow. So he suggested that they eat first, and after that, to discuss all the other matters, he and his assistant left the room and told her to have a good rest before going to dinner. Chloe didn't even have time to say a single word after the door closed. She was shocked for a while and didn't know what to do. But then the girl wondered what had happened and why he was holding her hand so tenderly. And when some time had passed since that moment, the girl's maids came into the room and brought her dinner. One of the maids, whose name was Isabel, turned to Lady Chloe and told her not to say that she had finished her meal, and Cassius asked if the food was not to her taste, since she had stopped eating it so quickly. The girl immediately said that it was not so wonderful at all. However, the maid replied that she had eaten very little, and Chloe replied that she always ate so little, and that it was quite normal. However, Cassia replied that children must eat well in order to grow up healthy, and for this reason, they looked at her as if she had committed some crime. Chloe was even a little worried. She understood that since they were looking at her like that, she needed to come up with something, so she simply pushed the plate aside, letting them know that she definitely didn't want to eat anything else. The maids had no choice but to remove the food, and they said that since she had lost her appetite, they had to clear everything off the table first. They also said that she should have a good rest, and Chloe thanked them for that. Also, they said that they had to leave her. However, if she needed something at any time, she could press the cord that was near her bed, and they would come immediately. Hearing this girl, she was a little surprised. However, she said that it was very wonderful. However, before leaving, one of the maids said in a very stern voice that she really could press it at any time. Chloe was a little wary of the maid's behavior. They all made her feel strange. And besides, she noticed that there were knights standing behind the door, guarding her. And for her, this was unusual. Chloe was aware of this fact that she first needed to figure out how she could contact her mother and uncle the magic stone bracelet that was given to her by her uncle and was supposed to be lost when she was kidnapped. This meant that she needed to find some new magic stone. Fortunately for her, her family's abilities included mana control, so Chloe was very lucky in this regard. And since all these abilities were conducted in magic stones, it was said that in the territory of Leo, magic stones were so widespread that they were practically everywhere. And this meant that Chloe could very easily contact them. The girl wondered whether, even if this was true information, she would be lucky enough to find one of these stones near her. She decided not to think about it for long, and decided to start her search by searching her room, because maybe there might be something lying around there. For some time, Chloe was brought to such a carefully examined, absolutely every corner of her room. She understood that these stones could help her escape, and therefore they were critically necessary for her. However, quite a lot of time had passed since then. She had searched every corner of the room. However, she could not find anything, and because of this, she was quite upset, because she had hoped for her luck. She lay down on the floor and thought about what they had said, about how the magic stones were as important as pebbles, but all she could find in her room were just baby things that were of no use to her at all. She lay on the floor for a while and then suddenly saw a large wooden box under the bed. She immediately became interested in what she was doing under the bed. This box, of course, interested her. Chloe immediately sat up straight and thought that it could be a box with a magic stone, so she decided to get it out as soon as possible and see what was in it. As soon as she took out this box with difficulty and opened it, she was amazed as soon as she saw what was inside. She saw a lot of different children's things, and this surprised her very much because there were little shoes, and she even saw a girl's pacifier there. Chloe didn't understand. Why should there be only children's things in this room? And it really upset her, because she really wanted to find something useful for herself. However, she knew that the original story said that she was the last child born into the lion family, which meant that her father made this room especially for Chloe, and because he treasured her. She looked at all these things for a while and thought about how hard it must have been for her father. But Chloe patted herself on the cheeks in order to distract herself from all these thoughts, because she did not need them. She didn't know the full situation yet, so she shouldn't jump to conclusions right now. Chloe should be focusing on finding the Mana Stone in order to contact her mother. In that short amount of time, she realized that she missed her mother and uncle so much that she even decided that they were also incredibly worried about her. So Chloe had to think of and find a way to let them know that she was okay as soon as possible. Some time had passed since then, and Chloe searched the room all night, but she still couldn't find anything. She even began to doubt whether the lion family was really known for being overflowing with mana stones. She understood that in order to search for stones even better, she had to ask to go outside. And the maid immediately allowed her to go out into the backyard, which Chloe was incredibly surprised by, but at the same time happy about. She decided to focus on getting rid of this fear of this whole family and just go outside to look for stones there. As soon as Chloe did this and went outside, she didn't know what she was supposed to do next, of course. The fresh air and beautiful green trees around calmed her down. However, she was still afraid. When she had gone some distance, A suddenly heard one of the knights and maids start talking. The man asked, "Was it really that same girl?" The maid immediately said that it was really so. It was she who was because of the terrible family, the wolves. They talked for some time about how they were very sorry that she had to experience only trauma and abuse, and did not take their eyes off Chloe. Then the girl thought that her father and paternal uncle were very wrong about the Wolf clan and about her entire family in general, which meant that all their servants were also spreading completely untrue rumors. Of course, she couldn't listen to all this any longer, so she turned to them and asked for forgiveness for interrupting. Chloe came closer to these people and said that this story that they were talking about among themselves was wrong. She could explain to them absolutely everything as it really was. However, the knight suddenly ran straight at her, and the maid took a position to defend herself if necessary. Chloe immediately stopped in place. She did not understand why they were behaving like that. But at that moment, another maid suddenly ran up to her from behind. She immediately took Chloe and sat her on her lap, and she sat down on the ground. She asked the lady if everything was okay with her. Her voice was worried. The girl did not understand what all the fuss was about, but immediately replied that she was absolutely fine then. The other servants also ran up to her and asked if she was injured, since she had just almost fallen to the ground. The knight, who was about to run at her, immediately said in an alarmed voice that if it weren't for Isabel, then absolutely no one knew what could have happened to her. After all, they really thought that she was falling. As soon as Chloe heard this, you were immediately very surprised. Then she turned around and saw a stone in the middle of the road. She immediately realized that most likely she got caught because of this stone, and they thought that she would not be able to stand on her feet. And at that moment, she realized that they all came running because they were worried, because they were really afraid for her, and she thought that they were already going to attack her and was even afraid of them. Chloe was shocked by such actions. Absolutely, all the servants who were nearby had frightened faces. However, somehow, even without suspecting it, the girl had already begun to fear them. believing all the rumors she had heard before. However, it was completely wrong of her, because all these people were worried about her. They wanted her to not be hurt in any way, and they tried their best to keep her safe. She immediately realized that there were no people in this place who could harm the child, and this made her very happy, because it meant that just as the lion family had misunderstood the wolf family, so their family had completely misunderstood the lion family. And that moment, Chloe realized that since this was all really true, then maybe she could be a little braver and stop being afraid of them finally. The girl immediately stood up and said that there was someone she wanted to visit. The knight smiled and said that of course she could ask for whatever she wanted. Then Chloe pointed towards the small outbuilding and said that she would like to see that very big and tall tower. In fact, she felt as if there might be something very important there, and that was the reason she wanted to go there. Chloe also believed that by going up to this tower, she could see the entire territory of the lions, and as soon as she climbed up there, she noticed that it looked completely different from the wolf and ewe territory, and it was all majestic. The sun had already begun to set over the horizon, and Chloe stood on this tower and enjoyed the beautiful view. She was very happy that she had gathered the courage to ask everyone and ask for what she wanted. And besides, it was very difficult for her to believe that they really made monastones in this tower. A little earlier, she asked Isabella about what they really did in this tower. The maid immediately explained that this castle made mana stones, and there was also protective magic above her. So it was completely safe, and that was why they allowed her to go up. Chloe said that she was really fascinated by it. However, the outer wall was really high to her, and she said that the place felt safe to her. Isabel said that this was all true. In addition to the wall itself, the guards stationed there had powerful magical weapons and protected it even with their lives. Therefore, it doesn't matter how strong the army was, no one could break through this wall. And as soon as Chloe heard this, she was very surprised, and at the same time even scared. She understood that in that case, even if she tried to contact her mother and uncle using the mana stone, they would definitely try to come there. And that meant that it could end very badly, since there was no place where they could hide, or even one place where the defense could be even a little weaker for them to get there. At that moment, the maid suddenly took Chloe's hands and, smiling happily, said that there was no more danger for her, so she did not need to worry so much. The woman herself actually believed all these rumors and thought that Chloe asked all these questions because she was very afraid that her family could find her again and harm her. However, at that moment, one of the knights said that it was indeed true that their knight had to protect her even at the cost of his own life, so she should not be afraid. Those evil wolves would never be able to break into that place, so she was perfectly safe there. Chloe was shocked to hear this. She couldn't believe that they actually thought that she was afraid that the wolf family would come for her. The girl also understood that if they continued to spread such misunderstandings, it would become much more difficult for her to meet her mother and uncle. So she turned to them all and said that she had something to tell them. Nothing bad had happened to her at the Wolf Manor, and they needed to hear it. The girl said that during her stay there, she was surrounded by love and tenderness, so they certainly should not have thought that anything bad happened to her there. The servants immediately assumed that she decided to pretend and say these words so that they would not worry. They thought that this girl was incredibly kind and beautiful, so they felt even more sorry for her. When Chloe saw that the servants reacted completely differently, they began to cry and suffer. She realized that they were not listening at all to the words that she was trying to convey to them. Chloe, who was standing at the very top of the tower, and the railing began to descend from there, and said that she really spoke the truth, and therefore asked them to listen to her well and understand. However, at the moment when the girl began to descend to the railings, which were quite old, could not withstand this and they broke. For this reason, Chloe began to fly straight down. As soon as the servants and knights saw all this, they were incredibly afraid for the lady and tried to run and grab her. However, she was already flying down at full speed. As Chloe was flying down, she couldn't believe that her life really had to end so quickly, but she didn't want it to happen like that at all.